Thank you for tuning in to IoT Connect, where we're covering some of the most interesting topics, trends, and news around the Internet of Things. IoT Connect is brought to you by Teal, a wholly owned, patented, GSMA certified eSIM platform that connects any IoT device to any network around the world. Now, I'm excited to welcome you all to this episode of IoT Connect. If you're like us and you're passionate about IoT, be sure to like this video and click that subscribe button so you don't miss a beat. Today, I'm excited to welcome Tiffany to the show. Rob is a technologist, IoT expert, influencer, and IoT evangelist with a long history of working with IoT technology since its inception. Rob, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be here. I feel like I've been incepted.
Yeah, we get a lot of Robs. This is the Rob edition of the podcast.
It pretty much is.
It is. And also joining us is Robby Hamblet, founder and CEO of Teal. So, as Robby mentioned, you've got the three Robs here. And today we're going to be delving into the link between connectivity and the technology that it enables across many industries. More specifically, we'll be looking at cellular IoT solutions and how you can determine what the best connectivity solution is for your business. One technology that we'll be talking about that's making waves globally is eSIM technology. So, Robby, the first question is for you. In 60 seconds, what is eSIM?
What is eSIM? eSIM is a dream. No, eSIM is a complicated term because it can refer to the embedded components, but it can also refer to like a reprogrammable component. So eSIM, technologically, it's an embedded universal integrated circuit card. But what that means is you can take this identity and you can solder it down to a board. Most people think about eSIM in the configuration of like it's programmable. So the fact that it is soldered means that there were some standards developed to make it changeable over time, the identity that lives inside of the card. And in iPhones now, you don't even physically remove a card. There is an embedded chip that they've soldered down in there. It gets even more confusing when you think about iSIM, which can run eSIM, right? So like eSIM can be an operating system, can also be a form factor, but yeah, it's either or. I like to think it's ideally both, right? It's embedded and it's reprogrammable. But there you go. That's what eSIM is. And I don't know if that was even 60 seconds.
So I don't even know what you said.
Yeah, exactly.
So which part?
Identity module.
Yeah. So like okay. I'm just an eSIM like executive, so I'm gonna give you like maybe the most technical of the definitions. But like a SIM card, right? Just a regular SIM card. That's something everybody knows. It looks like a little flash card, like a little memory card. Goes in your phone. It stores an identity that goes on the network. With eSIM, they're like, let's embed that, right? And we're gonna call it an EUICC, which is like the technical term for an eSIM. But what it came to mean was more the functionality of changing that subscription over time, that identity. So if you're going to embed something and like literally like solder it down or glue it down to a board, not literally glue, you probably want to be able to change something if you mess it up or if you ship it to the wrong country or something. So eSIM started to mean like something that you can change, like it's a reprogrammable card that's just sitting on the board, and you're able to swap out the network if you want. So that's why eSIM means the physical form factor, but it's also started to mean just the digital capabilities. You have eSIM functionality in iSIM, which is where there's no card, nothing soldered. It's inside of a modem. I know Apple wants to do that with their new iPhones. They want to get as many parts off the board as they can and into the silicon. But yeah, is that even better?
I'm sure a lot of people, when they bought recent iPhones, were kind of like, what's going on? Part of my activation process. I didn't have to put anything in. Where's the slot? I'm sure that was new for a lot of people.
Well, I'm sure it was good for the operators in a way too, because the carriers, for a while, they had this loophole where if you brought your own SIM card, they didn't charge you an activation fee, right? So if you literally took it out of your device and put it in the next one, they wouldn't charge you. Now as eSIM only, they always get their $45. And that's been, they've fought long and hard for that $45.
Oh yeah, that's some tough stuff for sure. I've heard people panicking though, thinking that they couldn't switch easily to another phone like they used to. Now that it's embedded, they're like, am I just locked into this cell phone forever?
Yeah, there is like some operators, or sorry, not operators, OEMs are trying to make it easier to swap between devices locally with eSIM technology. But yeah, everything is an internet call. So you got to hook that iPhone up to the internet if you want to reclaim a profile, or you got to dynamically change the key sets out on the operator side. Yeah, the tap between the two doesn't work. Yeah, and going between Samsung to Apple, that's not happening. Yeah, that's not happening.
Because if I turn on the Samsung, which doesn't have a SIM in it anymore, and this isn't a new one, this is the 22 Plus, and it was saying, I guess it supports eSIM, even though I don't think Samsung ever made a big deal of it like Apple did. And a lot of them are asking for, hey, point the camera at a QR code on the website of your mobile operator or something like that. And then magic will happen. And then $45 will be debited from your bank account.
Just for the activation, for the digital activation.
Yes.
But that functionality of like the QR code and the activation string, like it's been almost two separate worlds between consumer eSIM and the machine eSIM, the one that IoT devices use, right? Because IoT devices, they're very modular. People are buying different chips for their devices. They're buying pluggable embedded SIM cards. So like they're eSIMs, but they're literally looking like a regular SIM card, which is why it gets really confusing. Is eSIM a form factor or is it just functionality? But yeah, there's definitely this divergence. And now 2 weeks ago, GSMA said SGP32, new eSIM standard, they're coming back together. We're going to make the IoT devices work more like the consumer devices. It has one of the lamest names. I know in telco, like there's a ton of really dumb names for products, like a lot of acronyms, a lot of gatekeeping, but this is literally called like consumer eSIM for IoT. And it's like, but it's not for consumers. It's for IoT devices and it's for enterprise, but you're going to call it consumer eSIM. So it just very confusing nomenclature, and it's just going to make it even harder. But hopefully that becomes the one spec to rule them all.
Will someone be able to pick up their IoT device and point it at a QR code?
Yeah, so they do have headless and with head devices supported. So you could do a camera, a string, you could do a camera QR code. I'd love to see it at the AT command level, right? Like you do AT pound eSIM, because the QR code is just an activation string. It's just a different type of URL. And that'd be cool.
Well, for all those people in the audience today wanting to know what the heck is an AT command. But luckily our user-friendly CEO here has people, because I remember the early days of smartphones and having to put AT commands when I was on the Windows Mobile and phone team. Not very friendly.
Yeah, there's serial commands for like controlling the modem. If you're setting up an IoT device, you probably use them to set up the APN or look at what network you're connected to. But if you don't have a screen or a camera or something, you're using AT commands for that kind of stuff.
Right. Well, it's interesting when we think about a device scanning a code, and we think about IoT devices, at least kind of serious enterprise, business stuff. Usually it is headless. It doesn't have a user to work with it on the other end, and it's just deployed. And so on some level, the notion of I'm going to go out to this device and scan something to change it does seem, well, it's expensive. Actually, you have to go visit something. Wouldn't it be great if there was like some kind of technology, like where it just kind of shot something over the air into the eSIM, and then it's like, and it changed.
So we totally agree, right? Teal's been developing its technology for a super long time to do exactly that. The new spec means that devices can use it more for an activation use case as opposed to just like an active management. So like what we do today, it's remotely controlled, right? And that's why SGP02. This is a very technical podcast. I'm sorry, folks, but like
that's okay. I want to take this, from technical to real life situations here, but let's definitely cover the technology first.
Well, I was just gonna say, like in the original eSIM spec for machine devices, the one that everybody's been using with the cards or the chips, they're being embedded. It's a push-based mechanism like Rob's talking about. Unfortunately, a lot of that was designed around text messages to push identities around, and that wasn't very secure or very reliable. We wrote some patents on how to do it over a data bearer. Now there's this new spec, which is going to make it it's a pull-based mechanism, so you have to be with the device. But you could see that easily integrating into like an MDM tool, like a device management tool, some portal where people are configuring, their client certificates for their cloud instance or something in a device.
Yeah, I used to live in the MDM world. That was the last startup I did and sold before I joined Microsoft. And then we did a bunch of, but it was mobile device management for smartphones.
Yeah.
And which is still a lot easier than an IoT device because there's a human on the other side.
Yeah.
But no doubt about it, when we started building that technology, it was the notion of push. There was no expectation that the user was intelligent enough to deal with that stuff. And so it's like, we're pushing, we're going to activate it. We're going to send configuration to you. We're going to do all kinds of stuff. That's interesting. So SG something.
SGP. So the GSMA, they have SGP02, which is the M2M protocol. Yeah. SGP22, which is consumer protocol. And this new one, the granddaddy, is SGP32, which is the combination of the two kind of into, it's kind of like consumer functionality and the fact that you don't need to get an iPhone from each carrier like you do with machine eSIM today. With the functionality of the machine eSIM actually enabling somebody to do more than one carrier.
Okay. I think the SG probably stands for Stargate or something like that, because that's the only way this makes sense is if it's
so what does that all mean to the businesses out there that have IoT deployments globally? What does that mean to them?
I think it'll defragment things, right? So I know there's a guest on Rob Tiffany's podcast that was writing on LinkedIn about fragmentation in IoT. And did you see that post, Rob?
I did.
Yeah, and I was like, there's definitely some areas that are fragmented. We might have to bring him on the show to talk about this. But like
that's why we had the defragger for DOS.
Yes. Right now you have to like coordinate what SKU you're building with what type of eSIM you want to build it with, right? And there's companies like Teal that are building the one eSIM to rule them all, right? No need to go and have multiple SKUs, but you're still getting a lot of industry confusion from carriers issuing eSIM cards and chips and OEMs trying to bundle MVNO services into their products. What the new spec means is everything starts fresh. Everything's blank. Every device that you don't have to account for the chip anymore in your BOM. You don't have to coordinate, what carrier you're getting it from and making sure those 8 weeks to deliver that component are lined up with your production line. It's all a digital process. So like whenever that device is ready to go live, you make an API call and that's it. And it's a pull-based mechanism. So you have to configure it. You have to action the device to do something. But ultimately, I think it's a lot more flexible.
That's great.
So we've been really heavy talking about eSIM, and obviously eSIM's a very, very hot topic right now. But I would like to just talk briefly about just your standard SIM card, and the evolution towards multi-IMSI. You mentioned MVNOs. Can we talk about some of the use cases today where maybe one size doesn't fit all? And maybe go into some examples of where a single SIM solution may be beneficial versus a multi-IMSI versus can we touch on some of those use cases?
Dude, my head's already exploding with the Stargate eSIM thing.
Somebody
now you're talking about MZs? What's that?
Somebody is gonna go on YouTube and sort by recently uploaded, and they're gonna go down this rabbit hole and they're just gonna get their mind blown. Or they're going to be looking for Stargate Universe clips or something.
Could be.
We're going to pop up. Yeah, that was a great one. I love the Stargate.
Absolutely.
Shows.
So what in the world does IMSI mean?
Great question.
That is the credential, right? So
is that an exotic animal? or what?
Well, it's actually going away, so it's an endangered animal.
It's endangered.
Right?
Okay.
It's like everything in telco, it's going away, but it's not. It's more of an acronym. So it's like it's still there. You could call it an IMSI if you wanted to. It's just the International Mobile Subscriber Identifier. So it is the credential on the card that you're using to tell the radio network, the tower, who you are. And for a long time, one card, one IMSI, one identity. Then some companies got cute and they started doing multi-IMSI configs where they said, we're going to use, do I really want, I mean, you're asking me about multi-IMSI stuff. I was going to start talking about location update messages that the device gets from the network or sends to the network and copies the modem on that. With that kind of logic, you can tell what network you're connected to and load a different IMSI. So you're saying in the US, I should use this IMSI. In Brazil, I should use this IMSI. In China, I should use this identity. It's a lot of like local logic. And there's definitely like a lot of people that have built solutions that have broken down. I built a solution that was using multi-IMSI for a company called Freedom Pop. They were an MVNO. They did free wireless data. And the idea was that it would use Sprint in the US, rest in peace, and it would use Hutchison in the EU. And they could provide one SIM card, one service, and it would access both networks and jump between them depending on where it was in the world.
So that was like power to the people, right? You were doing the free thing.
It was free. Yeah, it actually made Sprint and
Stick
T-Mobile
it to the
giving
man.
away free service. They started doing like the free tablet plans and stuff for like 250 megabytes of data, because that's what I think Freedom Pop's business model at the end of the day was, just to have people forget about recurring credit card charges, because there was like a 70 cents authorization fee every month that everybody was getting dinged. Like I used to sign up for a lot of trial accounts because I was testing the cards, and man, it could not clean up billing. But so they're still around though. I don't want to say anything litigious, but like with that solution,
spoken like a seasoned executive.
Yeah,
I don't want to say anything litigious.
I'm just saying what happened way back, 10 years ago. It was a multi-IMSI configuration, so it would jump configs. That's definitely retired now. They don't do that anymore. But we designed that solution for them, not Teal, but the company I was at. And then eSIM came out, and they were like, dang, we can use like cloud logic to decide where this device is going to connect and how it's going to connect. It's going to change the IMSI based on some yet to be determined decision or logic. And that's where we're at now. So now it's just about making eSIM better. So you've got
so I'm probably oversimplifying, right? But you basically went from a single SIM, right, that would connect you on a one-to-one basis to a network, to now I need multi-network connectivity. So now I've got this multi-IMSI, and but that has its own limitations, right? Because you're locked into some degree. And then now we're looking at this cloud-based programmable eSIM. Can we talk about just some use cases that excite you, either Rob or Robby? And I know it's going to get confusing for those listening in as it relates to eSIM, but I think it would also be interesting to touch on, some use cases where multi-IMSI or even just your standard SIM card would still be beneficial.
You don't want to ask me why I said IMSI is an endangered term.
I should have asked you that. Because I assumed that everybody knew, but Rob,
yes.
Why is IMSI? Why are multi-IMSIs an endangered species? When it comes
telco. Like I said, it just sounds like a joke sometimes. There's a thing called a SUPI. Do you know what a SUPI is?
No, is that like a marsupial?
SUPI, SUPI, is the 5G replacement for IMSI. But the catch is that a SUPI can be an IMSI. So like it's its own, it's extending what an identity was before, adding some capabilities in terms of encryption. And it's
we're just going to add another layer of complexity here.
Just keep it. I mean, HLR, HSS, AUM, we're just going to keep upgrading
all the stuff that everybody knows. Well, also lately, there's some new specs and stuff around how 5G can work with satellites.
Yes.
Is that going to change anything with SIMs or eSIMs or anything? Or is it the same?
It makes them more important because before you had an ESN, an electronic serial number, in a ASIC, in a board. There's so many freaking acronyms. In a board for a satellite provider, they would just preload an identity. Sometimes they wouldn't even keep an identity. They would just say any traffic for this destination, we'll accept it. It doesn't matter. They would just whitelist at a traffic level, not on a user level. And they would let anybody upload anything. They're like, well,
wow, that sounds like denial of service attack waiting to happen there.
Well, it was so difficult to get the hardware because the hardware was married to the satellite company, and it would only work on that satellite company.
Right.
But yes, it was a security issue for that reason, but it was very expensive to DDoS a network like that because you'd have to upload a lot of fictitious data, and it would create problems. But the new extensions like release 17 NTN, non-terrestrial networks, means that it moves to a more standard type of authentication enabled by eSIM technology and a more standard set of protocols supported by the network. Because it used to be you couldn't get an IP address, right? Now, not only can you get an IP address, but you can authenticate on the network the same way you authenticate on a cellular network. So the SIM components and programmability all become more important. Now you could use an eSIM to get onto a cellular network or onto a satellite network, and before you couldn't do that. There are extensions to go even further, like the Starlink relationship with T-Mo. That's more like a failover scenario. It's texting.
I didn't know if that was the genesis of all this or if it drove it. Because you're right. We remember everybody saw Mike Seaver and Elon Musk down there at Starbase, Texas, hanging out by these giant starships. So what did they do something that was standards based, or were they doing something one-off, or were they?
So the way they're doing it is proprietary. The way that people like Sateliot and Skylo are doing it is non-proprietary. So that's the release 17. So that means any device with a chipset that supports satellite NTN release will work on that type of network. So it's a little more open, kind of like back when we used to get different iPhones for different carriers, like the modems would come with different bands. We're still kind of in that mode. So T-Mobile will enable Starlink to use its bands in a proprietary way to back up its own networks. But in the Skylo and Sateliot examples, those types of networks, they're using their own spectrum, but a non-proprietary broadcast technology.
So does it feel like this standardization between these eSIMs and satellite, I'm assuming that's going to open up more use cases for people to play? I mean, technology. With any, so you'll start seeing, do you know what RedCap is? I've heard about it. I've read a little bit.
It's a little buzzy, a little buzzword.
Yeah, it is buzzy. It is. It's a 5G thing.
5G reduced capacity or reduced capability. But those kind of modules will start baking in the ability to connect to these satellite networks. And that means that they can support the paging cycles that are required. So you can't connect to a satellite provider the same way you connect to a cell tower. You might only be able to radio something up every 40 minutes when it's over the device coverage area. But the costs are much higher. So I don't see it outright replacing. But a lot of these like NB-IoT from space offerings are going to be very compelling because now you don't have to plan your deployment around where Verizon actually turned on NB-IoT. Now you can just drop it kind of anywhere with a line of sight to the sky.
How does RedCap?
Oh, go for it, Rob. Yeah.
Well, I'm just curious. So we got RedCap. How does that compare or compete with LTE-M and NB-IoT? Or
RedCap is just like a modem technology. So it's it's just reducing a lot of the features that you would need on like a higher performance, like millimeter wave type device, and stripping it all down to, just getting messages out, less. It makes it more like LTE in a lot of ways. But I haven't seen, maybe, I haven't seen the 5G equivalents of Cat-M and NB-IoT yet, like the new revisions published yet. I don't think they're planning that until next year.
Well, just for some of us that aren't as well versed in all the acronyms and don't have as much knowledge as both of you, I think it would be helpful to talk about the application of eSIM, or even some use cases that would require access to a Starlink or a global star network. I think that would help to illustrate it for those listening in.
Yeah, a lot of those networks are designed for failover when they're equipped in a hybrid mode with cellular. So the device is doing like a 5G or 4G connection. That's going to be more cost effective and have a faster reporting time, just because it's easier to put something on the ground than it is in space. So the economies of scale mean it's cheaper. Also, a lot of the spectrum won't last long enough to be 70 miles up in the sky. But I see it helping with there's like classic examples of cattle tracking and what's it called? Shipping container. Anything that's doing lower payload would make a lot of sense. Because now their only option might have been satellite. Now they can do cellular when it's available and satellite when they have to, as opposed to like, we should just always do satellite.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was thinking. When you think about the complexity of supply chains in business today, and in the olden days, and mostly now, a lot of times when I think about cellular IoT, it was always for something that was outside and moving around. And that was the sweet spot. But there was the problem. It's like, okay, trains, trucks, all that stuff. But as soon as you got to a port and had to get on a big ship to go across the ocean, it's like, okay, we gotta either we're dark, or we got to switch to some completely different system to do satellite for tracking. It sounds to me like it will be more seamless, I guess. Maybe one thing to rule them all is seamless to go from terrestrial cellular up to the satellite and then back again when it gets to the other side of the ocean, without you having to do a bunch of weird stuff to make that happen. Maybe
I would love to use satellite for everything and just forget about cellular, right? But the transport doesn't really scale. Like the infrastructure is very expensive to put up there. You've got a lot of floating routers in the Starlink example that you can't optimize payloads like you do on the ground, where you're laying a bigger fiber line between Chicago and New York than you are, like, it's a floating kind of deployment, right? So you can't optimize Montana less than New York City. It's kind of the same in terms of how much resources it has. So it's always going to be more expensive. Cellular technology, I think, will have a lot of really fun stuff built into the cloud with like AWS Outpost and different like split tunneling and slicing technologies to get data into the cloud faster. Satellite's going to be lower performance, higher prices, but that's why it's going to be part of the solution in secondary and not primary. I don't think this new hybrid tech really opens up a new use case as much as it just makes people that were stuck with either have more coverage and backup options, or less costs and redundancy. So
I gotcha. Yeah, there's a guy I know, he's doing IoT stuff on ranches. Real simple use case too, just the water troughs and water tanks around big ranches. And when I mean big, I mean 100,000 acres, giant places. And you can imagine the use case is, I don't want to have people having to travel to make sure there's still water for the cows. And he tried LoRa, and it got ugly after a while. But cellular wasn't always a good option either, because the ranch was so big and so remote. And so he found himself having to do some satellite stuff. And
I just remembered there was a company, I can't remember the name of it. I'll try to look it up so we can throw it in the notes here. But they were doing in a lot of like off-grid. Have you seen the homesteaders or whatever, those TV shows on like Discovery where people are homesteading, they go out into Alaska, dig a well and everything. If you don't have water rights, or if you don't have a well, you typically buy like a big water tank, right? And you have it filled, periodically. So some waterman comes out and fills your tank for like $400, and you hope that lasts you through the spring. Or I don't know. I think people get it topped up a lot more frequently than that. But
I think Phoenix is going to need that pretty soon.
In Africa, in some parts of Africa, they use a lot of water trucks. And it's a big business because people are going around topping up these tanks, and you don't want to go to the site and top it up if nobody was home, right? Because then you're just burning fossil fuels and spending energy to do that. You're not necessarily going to waste the water because you're not going to pour it down the floor if they don't use it. But to make a more efficient distribution, there was a company we were working with that connected the water trucks with the water tanks, so they could enroll their customers. And now the customers didn't have to call the same guy every week and say, hey, I need a top up. It would just fill up for them when they needed it. And they had a big problem with cellular because the coverage was so sparse in the areas of Africa. And just in general, if you think about that problem of you need a water truck, you're probably pretty far away from a municipality with good cellular coverage. That's where satellite is a great example. It's also low payload. It's just a water reading, right? You're not trying to do video or anything. So that'd be a perfect model for this hybrid technology.
Send me a bit if I need to refill. No, that makes sense. How does eSIM, I always struggle with the whole cellular stuff indoors. I get outside, I get all that. How is that all playing out? When I'm always been so pragmatic. If I'm in a building, I'm going to use their Ethernet, or I'm going to use their Wi-Fi. I'm just going to piggyback on what they got. How are things going with cellular indoors these days?
Well, CBRS opened up a lot of things for innovation, right? The Citizens Broadband Radio Service, chunk of spectrum, for those that don't know, free to broadcast on and accepted by most OEMs. It's LTE band 48. It doesn't have 5G capabilities, that band. So people talk about private 5G. Almost all those companies, unless they have spectrum licenses, are lying about what they actually can do, because really 4G, and that's all it is.
Is that like how ChatGPT just lies to you sometimes?
Does ChatGPT lie to you?
No, I was just saying, is that like how ChatGPT routinely just lies to you? Like if it doesn't
just make stuff up if it doesn't.
Well, I was just saying, does it personally lie to you? Like, do you run a cloud-based AI? You don't have a local AI, Rob, in your basement?
I'm not as cool. Yeah,
I don't have it.
I don't have it.
That's all the rage now. These open source, like, local AI models.
Yeah. I'm
cool.
just loving though what you said, because I can certainly count a lot of private 5G companies saying they're running 5G over CBRS.
Yep.
It's on their websites. It's in their marketing material.
It's everywhere, right? And that's kind of been the problem, is like it's created really innovative like IT services. Like the way that these networks can be set up and managed has grown a lot, but the capabilities, like if you look at the theoretical capacity of the CBRS space, it's less than Wi-Fi 6, right? And they're already talking about Wi-Fi 7. They're already talking about new spectrum for Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi, unlicensed spectrum similar to CBRS, but with a much simplified access model. However, that means it's a lot less secure. Cellular, I think, definitely has a place, but you're going to have to get the operators or the spectrum holders to cough up the bands, right? So now you have specialized companies. To call Verizon a specialized company is pretty silly, but you have MNOs that are doing their own private network solutions, and they're saying, we have band 48, and we have all these other bands that we already have licenses for, and now we're just putting them indoors. So anyway, I think it's definitely the future, because the theoretical capacity of all the bands that Verizon owns and the way that cellular technology is able to connect so many more devices than Wi-Fi can, because of how the channels are distributed and how many access keys you can store at one time. It definitely makes sense. We're just not there yet, because nobody's said, like, here, you can license our spectrum. That's the O-RAN stuff that we were joking about You know, what ORAN fixes all of this, but there's no money in it for the carriers. So.
There's no money in it.
Yeah.
Right. It fixes it, but we went bankrupt. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, but gosh, I obviously Wi-Fi 6E gave some more spectrum to Wi-Fi. And then I have read about Wi-Fi 7, and I've seen ridiculous numbers like 30 gigabit speeds. How is cellular going to keep up with that? That sounds crazy.
Well, the capability of a millimeter wave deployment is way up there, right? You can do lower latency on millimeter wave than your HDMI cable between your laptop and the screen. You're talking about 21 milliseconds of latency on the signal for an HDMI cable, but 5 milliseconds of latency for the wireless signal between a tower and your device. So you can imagine it's about optimizing how that spectrum is deployed, finding out more creative business models for it. On the authentication side, to bring it all the way back to eSIM, it is a more secure method. The kinds of private networks that we work with, they're thinking about licensing, or they have licenses to spectrum. They've partnered with a carrier, or they're sponsored by a carrier, and now they're just pointing the antennas indoors. So they're focusing on how can we drive, I don't even know the number, but the theoretical capacity, if you just look at how many megahertz are in like Verizon's troughs, or AT&T or T-Mobile's troughs, compared to what Wi-Fi is carved out of, it's so much more possible space. It just doesn't get deployed because the licenses are outdoors, because the FCC incentivizes square miles. It's a different kind of model, but private definitely go somewhere. And authentication wise, it'll be easier. I promise it'll be easier. Teal will have a lot to do with easier than typing in the Wi-Fi password on the back of the router. So
right. But I do think it's going to be, I don't want to say an uphill battle, but the positioning, the marketing, the teaching, the education of the user. The reason I say that is a lot of times familiarity wins over something that's better. Everybody on the planet has a Wi-Fi access point router in their house. Every company on the planet has APs everywhere. And so there's that whole, well, this is what we know. You know what I mean?
It starts, I think, in the areas that already have problems with Wi-Fi, right? Because I'm using Wi-Fi right now, and I'm probably the most enthusiastic about private cellular. I'm in the top 1% of indoor private cellular enthusiasts, and I don't have any.
I always knew you were a 1%er.
I do have a band 48 eNode B from Bicells. That's kind of cool, but I'm like, it's slower than my Wi-Fi router. And I've got to now buy a wireless chipset that's not, I mean, the PC OEMs haven't figured out how to scale costs on that either. Nobody's paying an extra $200 just to do the same speed, right? But I do think the congested use cases, because Wi-Fi has a big problem in that it's the same channels being repeated. If you use a bunch of access points, it's the same thing over and over. You have a lot of congestion, overlap. The authentication method itself, the way the antennas are designed, just doesn't allow for as many devices chirping away on the network. Do you have like connected light bulbs at home, Rob?
No, I don't.
I went right to connected light bulbs, and I was like, I want Wi-Fi networks for each one. I want each one to have its own Wi-Fi network. Terrible idea. Yes, it's easier for me to connect to each one and change the color on it. But it also creates so much interference inside my house that you got to turn off the Wi-Fi network and use something like Zigbee or Matter or whatever. But cellular enables like the congestion reduction of the Matters and the lower power protocols at scale.
Yeah. All right, I've got another curveball. You know what's really inside every one of these buildings before we even get to Wi-Fi? Inside the walls is Ethernet cables. And you brought it up, the lighting stuff. This is really obscure. I've only read about this in the last few months. All right.
Do you have a PoE light bulb or something?
Boom. Yes. You
do have a PoE light bulb?
So the whole notion of it's kind of low voltage.
Yeah.
So PoE has been out for a while, and people are like, oh,
I can't believe you were going there. I can't believe you're. I was just throwing out something ridiculous.
Robby nailed it.
We're totally going there. And so power over Ethernet, if you have a power over Ethernet switch, let's just say in a building.
Yeah.
And I can run Cat6 cables. And yes, the first use cases, I'm powering my access points, my PoE access points, but there are PoE light bulbs. I've already read about a hotel, I think in Fort Worth, where they've redone an old hotel, and the whole thing is PoE low voltage. But the real kicker is 30% reduced energy usage because because it's all DC low voltage power.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty interesting stuff.
That is super cool because you don't have to do the whole wiring, like it's a 120 volt or whatever, 240.
I've heard that it may change, but you don't even have to hire electricians to do the build out. You probably don't. Cool. Just run a cable. We should name this episode PoE light bulbs. That's so funny. Yes. PoE was that thing that everybody that was nerdy thought was really cool like 20 years ago. And then it just died. Now it's becoming more of a thing for sure. I've seen it like, oh, that's cool. I can power the whole thing with one cord. Like, this hotel they're talking about. So PoE, like think about when you're staying in a hotel room. At your nightstand, there's lots of extra plugs and cords and USB things for you to plug in your phone. All that's PoE. Every single light bulb in the hotel is PoE, and they can control them, and they know about every one of them. I don't know if they were making this up or not. I think they said they're either have found or finding PoE flat screen TVs. The goal was make everything in the hotel that uses electricity PoE.
I guarantee you, if you go on AliExpress and you buy PoE TVs, there's a battery inside that's just waiting to die.
You're probably right. That's fair. Absolutely.
I see it though. I mean, that's super cool. No rule or no room for eSIM. PoE dominated world, but
but when I was at Ericsson and we were doing an early Skunkworks project for private 5G. Our first offering, it looks like little smoke detectors, to do what, but what do you think was on the bottom of the smoke detector? It was the Ethernet plug. There's still the expectations, just like Wi-Fi, there's still that expectation that there's still Ethernet in the walls. And that, because the Ethernet's faster than anything, right?
I met an entrepreneur that had a light bulb with its own B built in, like a micro one. And it was like using just the current from the bulb receptacle, and then bridging itself in, and that was pretty interesting.
That is.
Wonder if we're gonna get wireless electricity anytime soon. I mean, I guess we just keep going higher and higher on the RF throughput until it just happens and get a little warm.
A good friend of mine is the CEO of a wireless electricity company outside of Boston called Witricity. His name's Alex Grusin. He was I know that company. As usual, he was actually one of the partners of the VC firm that funded them, and then he needed to become the CEO. You know how that goes sometimes. It happens. But they're doing great. I think they've got Hyundai and BMW and stuff. Basically, you just drive over the pad that's built into the ground, and it just shoots the electricity to recharge the car.
What if a mouse gets in between the pads?
It's gonna really suck for the mouse. No bueno.
No bueno. Rob, what else you got for us? Double B.
I got lots, but I don't want to interrupt because you guys are dropping some knowledge, and it's great to just listen along. We transitioned to indoor, but I'd love to transition back to the carriers and this discussion about eSIM and why are some carriers rushing to adopt it while others are probably more reluctant to?
Yeah, it's a scary topic. I think carriers don't want to have like a best network can win scenario playing out at any point, right? They want commitments so that they can build out their network. They want cost controls so that they can keep a subscriber over time. But yeah, I mean, eSIM can be deployed safely and in a trusted way by an operator. You just need an orchestration platform to make sure you're not going to go out there and have 100 channel conflicts now, because anybody could access your network, and you were actually planning on your relationship with uBlocks to distribute your network. And it's now a channel conflict. It's a problem, and the wholesale group's fighting the enterprise group, and the enterprise group's fighting the business group. Yeah, so anyway, it can open up a lot of like access to the network, but that can be good and bad, right? Like I'm saying, you get a lower level of certainty over how long that customer is going to stay. You don't necessarily even know the customer if you really open it up. If it's an API based activation, maybe we're all paying for this in Bitcoin, and you can mine Bitcoin on your red cap PoE powered light bulb, and that's how you're registering on the network. Yeah.
That's brilliant. I was hoping you were going to just kind of go the whole Rube Goldberg thing and see how many different things you could add onto it in order to
so you're mining Bitcoin. You've got an ASIC mining Bitcoin inside of a light bulb that's using red cap to connect to the network, but PoE to actually mining
save energy
connection too. And then you're paying for it all over API, and you're using AI to distribute which light bulbs get connected at what point. But the Bitcoin pays for the network services. And anyway, eSIM could create a really digital environment for telcos where they don't have to know the customer even. But they want to, right? They want to be able to build out their network in the right way. They don't want a bunch of random devices turning on one day doing terabytes and terabytes of traffic in a corner of the country they have no coverage in, or they don't have the capability to cover. So
that's interesting what you said.
Yeah. I mean, if that's the bad, like what's the good then? why would some carriers, and we hear of even some of the larger carriers adopting eSIM, why are some rushing towards it rather than from it?
The people that are having FOMO, right? So it can be domestic operators that are even maybe a consumer MVNO. They're just saying, we're going to win the price per gigabyte war on prepaid. And it's Mint Mobile versus Red T versus Boost versus Cricket, all these like second tier operator solutions. They don't really care if you jump between those a million times, because those properties don't get the FCC credits, and they don't have to bid on spectrum either. So there's the FOMO for domestic users. Then there is also the inbound use case. So like you've got people coming to you from other countries. If you're a US based IoT company with your Bitcoin light bulb, you want to go into Singapore, you can either try to figure out how to work with that carrier in Singapore, which is just as hard as it is to work with carriers here in the US, except maybe now you have a language barrier too. Or it can be a digital offering. It's a click, it's a link, it's an API call, and you're onto that network, and you're on that network with commercials that make sense. You don't have to rely on the resellers. So there's lots of iterative revenue opportunities for carriers with that kind of inbound model. You can drive just more revenue in. Problem is when the revenue goes out, when you have people leaving your network with the same eSIM policy. And that's where they would not care so much in a consumer MVNO and the low cost tier, but they would care more about the primary networks where they're really trying to do larger build outs and they need that certainty.
Is this kind of like when I want to sign up for something, I just go on the web and it's really easy, but if I want to cancel it, I have to call somebody?
Yes, like LA Fitness, I literally had to send a letter because I was moving away from an LA Fitness area. And they literally make you write them a letter.
Hey, I'm still a member.
Because you didn't write the letter.
Yeah.
You got to write the letter. You got to do a cease and desist or something. I don't know, man. Yeah,
it's crazy. Somebody needs to stand up and do common sense government. I'm a capitalist, obviously. So like I'm normally like free market and everything, but to have the carriers, or not the carriers, to have the SaaS companies just try to hook you into a subscription they know you can't cancel or know how to cancel. Like you should get a refund if you don't log into Netflix that month, right? You should be able to, you should have to prove, if you're Netflix, that the customer knows that they're still using your service once a quarter, once a year, something, right? Like There's so many. I don't want to look at my credit card statements because I know there's things like that where it's like, oh, I'm still paying for Instacart. No, like.
I'm just loving where this is going. We've evolved from SIMs to now we're talking about business models.
It should be a fun conversation.
Talked about not ever knowing your customer.
Yeah.
And when I hear that, and it immediately makes me think about the whole SaaS thing and that whole product-led growth, PLG movement.
Yeah.
Where to whatever your thing is, it's inherently viral, like Calendly or Slack or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm really intrigued by that. And just us talking here for the last few minutes, mostly you talking, Robby, it's almost like, how do you experiment with new business models like that, where you don't necessarily know the customer like you do. You're not spending tons of money to have that deep relationship.
Yeah.
And your product offering is somehow inherently viral that does this product-led growth, which a lot of people need that because it's not like everybody can afford to have a giant sales force, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's got to get to that point for eSIM because that's how the networks are distributed, right? And you want it, if you're a network, you want to go viral. You want to be the easiest thing to work with. You want to be the most accessible. And you can create a SaaS model, right? That restricts people from leaving your network. You can say it's a 2-year sign up, but we're going to make it really easy to get in. We're going to collect a credit card or whatever up front, and then we're going to bill you blind until you call us to cancel or write us an email or a written letter. But I think we can connect this to what was Rob Double B? What was your question?
Oh, just if there needs to be a shift in the telco model.
Yeah. So like Visible was that MVNO that Verizon launched, and they said we're going to be digital only, right? It's kind of like in insurance, like eSurance, right? There were a few different insurance brands that were like, we're digital only, we're going to be very accessible, very easy, pull a quote in one button press, like we just give us your social and we'll figure out where you live and how many dogs you have, and we'll we'll take care of it.
I remember when banks did that. You started having totally digital online only banks. There's no branches, you know.
Yeah. Can you believe that telcos today, like you still have to go into a physical store and show them your driver's license to access eSIM? That's still crazy. How concerned the carriers are about the technology. But I think there'll be ways to validate that identity built into the credentialing, the eSIM functionality. Companies like Teal are working on things like that for carriers, but a completely digital approach where you don't even know the customer, that can be a viral product like Rob's talking about. And something like Visible.
How do we make Teal like this?
Yeah. Well, we need the carriers because Teal serves the operators, right? And the operators have to be that flexible about how people access their network. And we're certainly driving them in that direction. But the business models of like any device, if you turn on a QuickTel dev board and you can just go AT pound Verizon, and you've got Verizon, and Verizon didn't have to call you, you didn't have to meet them at a trade show, you didn't have to sign any paperwork. That's really cool. That could be very cool. And they're kind of doing that in consumer land because there's so many MVNOs fighting for the low cost user. But in IoT, I'd like to see that model take off too.
Yeah, I mean, part of product-like growth is that kind of freemium, try before you buy. Once you see value, then you start paying. Yeah, it's inherently viral. Interesting stuff.
Well, sure. Well, I keep mentioning Verizon, but Verizon has the eSIM trial. Do you know about that?
No.
So you can go on Verizon's website, scan a QR code, and try their network out for 2 weeks, no costs. You can, torrent as much as you want. They're not going to say anything because they won't have any of your billing details, but you can try the network, right? I'm not sure. It's super cool. It's super cool. Imagine that for IoT, right? Imagine that for machine devices that have problems with site surveys and like how they're going to stand up their deployment. So
makes a lot of
sense. The more
sense.
accessible the network is, the more revenue, I believe, just the better use cases.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think we're onto something here. This is a marketing sales call, folks, and
How do
business
we-
modeling.
How do we
Business
loop,
modeling.
Sponsored by Verizon also.
how do we
Yes,
loop PoE?
somehow sponsored by Verizon. They're getting a lot of love today.
Well, my phone's open for AT&T or T-Mobile. If you guys want to do a free eSIM trial for your consumer offerings, Teal would love to support that. But yeah, how can we connect this back to PoE?
Well, since you're giving all this love to Verizon, I'm going to give props to Apple. So I'm doing this on my 5G iPad. It's not the really fancy iPad
Did
Pro.
Apple need any props? Does Apple need props right now?
Not
You
really.
don't need it. Give it to
They
somebody.
don't need it.
Yeah.
They don't need it. But what
What
I
network
like
are you
about
on?
it,
T-Mobile needs props more than Apple does.
T-Mobile.
They didn't
We're giving
release a
love to
headset.
our neighbors in Bellevue and Factoria.
Yeah.
But what's cool about this, even though it's not the high-end one, it's got 5G and they put the camera on the correct side of the device.
In the corner.
The long side. On the long side, yeah, nice, like a laptop.
Yeah.
And so I have found this to be this awesome communications device. I've been in cars. I've got this case on it with the kickstand on the back. I can hook it over my steering wheel. And
So you're saying it's kind of like a Surface, but it's got like less apps?
It's like a Surface with less apps, but cheaper, less
Yeah.
power, longer battery life.
They really nailed the price performance ratio on the iPads for sure. Yeah.
Oh yeah. It's just
Can't run Wireshark. Can't run Wireshark on them, but
well, crap.
Price performance.
Well, they're thrown out the window.
Yeah.
Well, Rob, I'm actually glad that you mentioned Apple because when it comes to FANG stocks, Amazon was recently mentioned in a recent CNBC segment that also included a Teal board member, former AT&T CEO and president Glenn Lurie, who was stating that the math doesn't work if Amazon were to potentially get into the mobile carrier space. So I wanted to just pose the question, can you imagine a world where FANG companies merge with big carriers or start to become the MNOs of the future, and why or why not? What?
Rob, I'm going to be mad if you steal the point that I'm going to go to, but you can have first crack.
I'm not going to say anything about Microsoft acquisitions. I'm just going to leave it to you. I'm sure you're thinking of something else.
You're going to talk about Metaswitch? I wasn't thinking Metaswitch.
Yeah.
No, I wasn't thinking about Metaswitch. I was thinking about
I'm just thinking about Mobile World Congress the last 2 years, and Microsoft's there pretending they're a telco.
Yeah, telco service company maybe. But yeah, I mean the main applications. Even you've got Meta funding Magma, the open source 5G project. Yeah. You've got Amazon and their rumored Prime Wireless, but also Sidewalk is what I was going to talk about. They're already the largest LoRaWAN company in the world, probably. Like, do you know of any, Rob, that would have the coverage of Sidewalk?
They're battling it out with Helium.
Yeah, they're definitely bigger. There's definitely more Alexis than Helium.
Yeah, exactly.
But you've got Apple. I think Apple hates carriers. And they've always hated carriers. It's probably Glenn's fault that Apple hates carriers because of the whole AT&T locked exclusivity that left a lot of potential revenue on the table for a while with Apple. But that's a call.
That was the only game in town for them at the time, though. Remember, Verizon told them
AT&T made so much money on that. They made so much money being the only iPhone place.
It also almost destroyed their network as well while doing it. Yeah,
because now all of a sudden people could use it. But if you're in the cloud, you obviously, the next extension is how do you get things into the cloud? Whoever's the easiest to get into the cloud is going to win the cloud wars, right? You've got T-Mobile doing their partnership with AWS to whitelist traffic on IoT networks back towards AWS. You've got like Google Cloud, I think, was doing something with Verizon at one point, but Google's been really weird about IoT, and they killed their IoT core product. I mean, they just can't seem to figure out. They seem to be after different types of use cases, but I could totally see Amazon doing that. I think it's a legitimate rumor. I think they did talk to one carrier, and that's Dish Mobile or Dish Wireless, because Dish doesn't have a low-cost MVNO today. They don't really have much of a network yet, but they will. And even though it's running a bit behind schedule, they'll need subscribers for it, for the FC to back up the FCC spectrum deals that they have to hold those licenses. So I could see them doing something aggressive with somebody like Amazon and saying your first 2 gigs are free for every Amazon Prime user, and it's going to cost a nickel just to get the users, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm wondering where do you think Glenn's head was at when he was saying the math?
Well, Glenn was saying the numbers don't work for any of the MNOs, and that's true. Like AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile definitely doesn't make sense for them. They all, I mean, how much money did T-Mobile spend for Mint Mobile, right? They're not just going to give it all away to Amazon. They spent billions of dollars to get Ryan Reynolds' face on a SIM card, and now they've got to protect that, right? It's all about users. I think there's 100 million Prime users, Prime subscribers. You create the largest MVNO overnight, and you kill all your current MVNO properties. Doesn't really make sense to do that if you're a carrier. They've all been really hesitant about Google Fi too, and that was because of the sum of all parts kind of positioning. And that's still a problem for them today. But I think Amazon and that model of, we're going to throw in free wireless coverage, and you're going to have you're going to have all the coverage of all the carriers and free Amazon coverage. I think that scares the carriers. I don't think the numbers make sense for the premium wireless offerings, but I do think it would make sense for somebody like Dish that's desperate for users.
Yeah, we could see that. Let's say terahertz and all kinds of stuff like that.
It's all marketing. It's a little long in the tooth now. 5G product cycles are all soaked up, right? Everybody thinks they have it, but it doesn't really, and everybody's kind of resigned to the fact it doesn't do anything that different than 4G. The fundamentals are there to make it do something better, right? Compute at the edge, dynamic slices, BVLOS drones, things like that. They just don't do it. So I think you need some clear marketing, like colloquial term like 6G to say this, everything before 5G, every mid-low band 5G, right? High band 6G. That's the only thing we're going to call 6G. Even if you have enhanced backhaul and all those little things, like even if you have application level services like compute and transport being bonded together, just make it about the performance and say there's some minimum performance that you need to have to call it 6G.
Right. And you need to stand right next to it.
Yes. And it should make you hum.
Yeah. Totally. Good stuff, man.
Well, there you have it. If you're like us and you're enthusiastic about IoT, be sure to like this video and click that subscribe button below so you don't miss a beat. Be sure to listen in to future episodes of IoT Connect at tealcomm.io/IoT Connect. And for anyone out there who's evaluating multi-carrier solutions, and if you're interested in learning more about eSIM, be sure to check out GSMA's eSIM Buyer's Guide for Enterprise. We think this is a very helpful document that covers some of the key factors to look for when evaluating true eSIM solutions. And we've made it available for free on our website. So head on over to tealcomm.io, or you can check out the link in the comments section below. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in, and thank you to Rob and Robby for being on the show today.